Marcus Thompson had always been proud of his simple life. Working as a mechanic in a small town in Ohio, he lived in a modest house with his wife Sarah and their two teenage children. At 42 years old, he thought he knew everything there was to know about himself and his family history. His parents had died when he was young, leaving him with only fragments of stories about their past and a small box of old photographs that never seemed to tell the whole story. The idea to take an ancestry test came from his daughter Emma, who was working on a family tree project for her high school history class. She had been pestering him for weeks about their family background, frustrated that he couldn't provide the detailed information her classmates seemed to have about their ancestors. Sarah had finally suggested they try one of those popular DNA testing kits that promised to unlock family secrets and trace lineages back centuries. Marcus had been skeptical at first. He was a practical man who believed in what he could see and fix with his own hands. The idea that spitting into a tube could reveal deep family secrets seemed like something out of a science fiction movie. But Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah had already ordered the kit online before he could protest further. When the small package arrived at their doorstep 3 weeks later, it sat unopened on their kitchen counter for another week while Marcus wrestled with a strange sense of unease he couldn't quite explain. The process itself had been simple enough. Following the instructions, Marcus provided his saliva sample and mailed it back to the laboratory. The company promised results within 6 to 8 weeks, and Marcus promptly forgot about it, returning to his daily routine of fixing cars and enjoying quiet evenings with his family. Life continued as normal until that Tuesday morning in late October when everything changed. Marcus was under the hood of a 2015 Honda Civic, wrestling with a stubborn alternator when his phone buzzed with an email notification. Wiping his greasy hands on his coveralls, he glanced at the screen and saw the subject line that would alter the course of his life forever. "Your Ancestry DNA results are ready." His heart began to race for reasons he couldn't understand. Something deep in his gut told him that whatever was in that email would change everything. He waited until his lunch break to open the email, driving home to his quiet house where he could process the information in private. Sarah was at her job at the local library, and the kids were at school, leaving him alone with his laptop and a growing sense of anxiety. The Ancestry website loaded slowly on their old computer, each second feeling like an eternity as Marcus stared at the spinning wheel on the screen. When the results finally appeared, Marcus had to read them 3 times before they began to sink in. According to the DNA analysis, he was not just Marcus Thompson from Ohio with Irish and German heritage as he had always believed. The test showed significant genetic markers linking him to European nobility, specifically to a royal bloodline that traced back to medieval England. But that wasn't the most shocking revelation. The really earth-shattering news came in the section labeled Close DNA Matches. There, at the top of the list, was a match showing a 99.7% probability of a parent-child relationship with someone listed as Princess Catherine Elizabeth Fairchild. The profile showed that this person was 24 years old and living in London, England. According to the additional information available, she was indeed a member of a minor European royal family, though not one that Marcus had ever heard of. Marcus stared at the screen until his eyes began to water. This had to be some kind of mistake. There was no way that a small-town mechanic from Ohio could be the father of a European princess. He had never even been to Europe, let alone had any romantic relationships there. The last time he had traveled anywhere significant was on his honeymoon with Sarah 15 years ago, and that had been to Niagara Falls. His mind raced through every possibility he could think of. Maybe there had been a mix-up at the laboratory. Perhaps someone had switched his sample with someone else's, or maybe the computers had made an error in processing the results. He refreshed the page multiple times, hoping the information would change, but it remained stubbornly consistent. The DNA match was there, clear and undeniable, claiming that he was the biological father of a young woman he had never met. The more he stared at the results, the more questions flooded his mind. Who was this Princess Catherine? How could she be his daughter when he had never had any children before Emma and their son Jake? Where had she come from, and why was she living as European royalty while he lived a simple life fixing cars in Ohio? Most importantly, what did this mean for his family and the life he had built with Sarah? Marcus closed the laptop and sat in his kitchen, surrounded by the familiar sounds of his neighborhood. Children were playing in the street outside, and he could hear Mrs. Henderson next door working in her garden. Everything seemed normal and peaceful, yet his world had just been turned completely upside down. He felt as though he was living in two different realities simultaneously. One where he was just Marcus the mechanic, and another where he was somehow connected to European royalty through a daughter he had never known existed. The rational part of his mind kept insisting that there had to be an explanation. Maybe this Princess Catherine was adopted, and her biological father happened to share some genetic markers with him. Maybe the Ancestry company's database was flawed, or maybe there were other factors that could explain such an unusual match. But deep down, something told him that the test results were accurate, and that meant his entire understanding of his own life was fundamentally wrong. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself unable to concentrate on anything else. He returned to the garage but couldn't focus on the cars that needed repair. His hands shook as he tried to hold his tools, and he found himself making careless mistakes that he would normally never make. His boss, Jerry, noticed his distraction and suggested he take the rest of the day off, assuming that Marcus was coming down with something. Driving home early, Marcus felt as though he was seeing his neighborhood for the first time. The houses that had always felt like home now seemed foreign and temporary. The life he had built with Sarah and their children suddenly felt fragile, as though it could be shattered by this new information. He wondered how he would even begin to explain this to his family, or whether he should say anything at all until he could figure out what it all meant. That evening, Marcus struggled through dinner with his family, trying to act normal while his mind raced with questions and possibilities. Sarah noticed his unusual quietness, but attributed it to a long day at work. Emma chattered excitedly about her history project, asking again about their family background, and Marcus found himself giving vague, distracted answers while thinking about the princess who might be his daughter. After the children went to bed, Sarah settled next to him on the couch to watch television, but Marcus couldn't focus on anything except the laptop sitting closed on the dining room table. The Ancestry results felt like a time bomb waiting to explode his carefully constructed life. He knew he would have to tell Sarah eventually, but he had no idea how to explain something that he didn't understand himself. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling while Sarah slept peacefully beside him. He thought about his parents, who had died in a car accident when he was 23, just a year before he met Sarah. They had been young when they had him, and he had always known that there were parts of their past they didn't talk about much. His father had been in the military, and his mother had worked various jobs before settling down to raise Marcus. Could there be something in their history that would explain this connection to European royalty? Marcus also found himself thinking about the timeline. Princess Catherine was 24 years old, which would mean she was born when he was 18. That would have been during his senior year of high school, a time he remembered as being focused entirely on graduation and figuring out what to do with his life. He had been dating a girl named Lisa then, but that relationship had ended when they went to different colleges. There had been no other significant relationships during that time, and certainly nothing that could have resulted in a child. As the hours ticked by, Marcus began to realize that he would need to do more research before he could make sense of any of this. The Ancestry website had provided basic information about Princess Catherine, but he needed to know more about who she was and how she had come to be part of a European royal family. He also needed to understand more about DNA testing and whether there could be any other explanation for such a strong genetic match. By the time dawn broke through their bedroom windows, Marcus had made a decision. He would spend the next few days researching everything he could about Princess Catherine Elizabeth Fairchild and the royal family she belonged to. He would also contact the Ancestry company to confirm that there had been no errors in processing his sample. Only then would he decide whether and how to tell Sarah and his children about this shocking discovery. The morning brought no relief from his anxiety. As Marcus prepared for work, he caught sight of himself in the bathroom mirror and was startled by what he saw. His usually calm brown eyes looked haunted and confused, and there were dark circles under them from his sleepless night. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost, which in a way he supposed he had. The ghost of a past he didn't remember and a daughter he had never known existed. Getting ready for work felt like going through the motions of someone else's life. Marcus brushed his teeth, showered, and put on his coveralls, but everything felt surreal and disconnected. He kissed Sarah goodbye and told his children to have a good day at school, all while feeling like he was watching himself from outside his own body. The simple routines that had always grounded him now felt meaningless in the face of this enormous unknown. At the garage, Marcus tried to lose himself in work, but his mind kept drifting back to the Ancestry results. Every time he looked at his hands working on an engine, he wondered whether Princess Catherine had inherited anything from him. Did she have his brown eyes or his stubborn streak? Was she mechanically inclined, or had she inherited different talents entirely? The questions seemed endless and impossible to answer. During his lunch break, Marcus drove to the local library where Sarah worked, hopping to use their computers to do more research. He told Sarah he needed to look up some technical information for a car repair, and she directed him to an available computer in the back corner of the building. Sitting in the quiet library, surrounded by books and the soft sounds of people studying, Marcus began his search for information about Princess Catherine Elizabeth Fairchild. What he found only deepened the mystery. Princess Catherine was indeed a real person, and she was connected to the House of Fairchild, a minor but legitimate royal family with ties to both England and a small European principality. The family had a long and distinguished history, with connections to major European royal houses going back centuries. Princess Catherine herself appeared to be well-educated and involved in various charitable causes, particularly those focused on helping disadvantaged children. The photographs Marcus found online showed a young woman with dark hair and serious brown eyes that looked remarkably familiar. She had a certain strength in her expression that reminded him of his own determination, and there was something about the shape of her face that seemed to echo his own features. Looking at her pictures, Marcus felt a strange combination of recognition and impossibility that left him feeling more confused than ever. As Marcus continued his research, he discovered that Princess Catherine had been raised by the royal family from a very young age, though the exact details of her early life were kept private. There were references to her being brought into the family through some kind of special circumstances, but the official biographies were deliberately vague about her origins. This only added to Marcus's growing certainty that there was much more to this story than what appeared on the surface. The more he learned about Princess Catherine, the more real she became to him, and the more impossible his situation seemed. How could he be the father of someone living such an extraordinary life when his own existence was so ordinary? What could have possibly connected a teenage boy from Ohio to European royalty, and how could such a connection have remained hidden for 24 years? As the afternoon wore on, Marcus realized that he was facing the most important decision of his life. He could try to ignore the Ancestry results and pretend that nothing had changed, hoping that somehow this information would remain buried and never affect his family. Or he could take the terrifying step of trying to learn more, knowing that whatever he discovered might completely alter everything he thought he knew about himself and his past. Sitting in the quiet library, staring at pictures of a young woman who might be his daughter, Marcus felt tears beginning to form in his eyes. For the first time since opening those test results, he allowed himself to truly feel the magnitude of what he was facing. If Princess Catherine really was his daughter, it meant that somewhere along the way, his life had taken a turn he had never known about. It meant that there was a whole part of his history that had been hidden from him, and it meant that he had missed 24 years of his daughter's life. The weight of all these realizations finally became too much for Marcus to bear in silence. As he sat surrounded by the familiar comfort of his wife's workplace, looking at images of a daughter he had never known existed, Marcus Thompson broke down and cried for the first time since he was a child. The days following Marcus's breakdown in the library passed in a blur of sleepless nights and distracted conversations. He had managed to compose himself before Sarah finished her shift, but the emotional dam had been broken. Every quiet moment was filled with thoughts of Princess Catherine and the impossible reality that she might be his daughter. He found himself studying his own reflection more carefully, looking for traces of the young woman he had seen in the online photographs. Sarah began to notice his distraction more acutely. During breakfast on Friday morning, she set down her coffee cup and looked at him with concern etched across her face. Marcus had been staring at his untouched eggs for several minutes, lost in thought about DNA percentages and royal bloodlines. When Sarah called his name for the third time, he startled as though waking from a dream. "You've been somewhere else all week," Sarah said gently. "Is everything okay at the garage? Is Jerry giving you trouble about something?" Her voice carried the warmth and understanding that had drawn Marcus to her all those years ago, but now it only made him feel worse about the secret he was carrying. Marcus forced a smile and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "Just tired, I guess. Mrs. Patterson's old Buick has been giving me fits all week." The lie came easily, but it tasted bitter in his mouth. In 15 years of marriage, He had never kept anything significant from Sarah, and now he was hiding what might be the most important discovery of his life. That weekend, Marcus told his family he needed to run some errands and drove instead to the city library in Columbus, an hour away from their small town. He couldn't risk using the local library again, where Sarah might notice his research, or where neighbors might see him looking up information about European royalty. The drive gave him time to think about what he was hopping to find and what he would do with whatever information he discovered. The Columbus Library was much larger than their local branch, with extensive genealogical resources and access to international databases that Marcus had never known existed. With the help of a librarian who specialized in family history research, he began to dig deeper into the House of Fairchild and their connection to Princess Catherine Elizabeth. What he found painted a picture of a family with centuries of noble heritage, but also a modern history marked by tragedy and intrigue. The current Duke of Fairchild, Lord William Fairchild, had inherited his title at a young age after his parents died in a skiing accident in Switzerland. He had never married, but had taken on the responsibility of raising several children who had been brought into the family under various circumstances. Princess Catherine was one of 3 young people who held royal titles within the House of Fairchild despite not being blood relatives of Lord William. The official family history described them as adopted into the noble line through special decree, but Marcus found references in older newspaper articles that suggested the truth was more complicated. There were hints of secret arrangements, of children being placed with the family for their own protection, and of Lord William's commitment to providing sanctuary for those in need. The more Marcus researched, the more he began to understand that the House of Fairchild operated differently from other royal families. Rather than focusing solely on bloodline succession, they seemed to have created a kind of chosen family that included people brought together by circumstances rather than genetics. This raised new questions about how Princess Catherine had come to be part of their world, and whether her placement there was connected to something that had happened in Marcus's past. Digging deeper into Princess Catherine's early life, Marcus found a few brief references to her arrival at the Fairchild estate when she was 3 years old. The articles mentioned that she had been brought to England from America under emergency circumstances, and that her placement with the royal family had been arranged through international humanitarian channels. There were no details about her parents or the specific nature of the emergency that had led to her relocation. The timeline began to make more sense to Marcus as he pieced together these fragments of information. If Princess Catherine had arrived in England at age 3, that would have been in 2002, which was 21 years after her birth in 2001. That placed her birth during Marcus's freshman year of college, not his senior year of high school as he had initially calculated. The timing still seemed impossible, but it was slightly more plausible than his original assessment. Marcus spent hours staring at the library's computer screen, trying to remember anything significant that had happened during his freshman year of college. He had attended Ohio State University on a partial scholarship, studying automotive technology while working part-time at a local garage. He had been focused on his studies and his work, with little time for the social activities that occupied most of his classmates. There had been one significant event that year, though Marcus had never spoken about it to anyone, not even Sarah. During his second semester, his roommate's sister had visited their dorm room during spring break. Her name was Rebecca, and she had been dealing with some kind of family crisis that Marcus had never fully understood. She had stayed with them for several days, sleeping on their couch while trying to figure out her next move. Rebecca had been beautiful and mysterious, with dark hair and serious brown eyes that reminded Marcus now of Princess Catherine's photographs. She had been older than Marcus, perhaps 22 or 23, and she had seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. During her stay, she and Marcus had talked for hours about their dreams and fears, sharing a connection that felt deeper than anything he had experienced before. On her last night in their dorm room, Rebecca and Marcus had spent the evening walking around campus, talking about everything and nothing. When they returned to the room, Marcus's roommate had already gone to sleep, leaving them alone in the common area. What happened next had been spontaneous and intense, a moment of connection that neither of them had planned, but both had seemed to need. The next morning, Rebecca had been gone. She had left a note thanking Marcus for his kindness, but explaining that she had to disappear for reasons she couldn't explain. She had begged him not to try to find her and had promised that someday, when it was safe, she would explain everything. Marcus had been heartbroken but had honored her request, never speaking about her to anyone and eventually convincing himself that their brief relationship had been nothing more than a college memory. Now, sitting in the Columbus Library 23 years later, Marcus wondered if Rebecca could possibly be connected to Princess Catherine. The timing would be right for Rebecca to have discovered a pregnancy after leaving Marcus's college. If she had been dealing with some kind of family crisis or dangerous situation, it might explain why she had disappeared so suddenly, and why a child might have needed to be placed with a protective family like the Fairchilds. Marcus tried to remember Rebecca's last name, but realized with frustration that he had never known it. His roommate had always referred to her simply as "my sister Rebecca," and Marcus had been too young and too infatuated to ask for more details. He couldn't even remember his roommate's full name clearly, though he thought it might have been David or Daniel something. Determined to pursue this lead, Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon trying to track down information about his college roommate. Using the university's online alumni directory and old yearbooks available through the library's digital archives, he was able to narrow down his search to a few possibilities. After several hours of cross-referencing names and dates, he found what he believed was the right person, Daniel Morrison, who had graduated with a degree in business administration in 2005. The alumni directory showed that Daniel Morrison was currently working as a financial advisor in Denver, Colorado. Marcus stared at the listing for a long time, debating whether he had the courage to contact someone he hadn't spoken to in over 20 years to ask about a sister whose real name he didn't even know. The conversation would be awkward at best, and potentially devastating if his suspicions proved correct. As closing time approached at the library, Marcus printed out the information he had gathered and drove home in a daze. The hour-long drive gave him time to process everything he had learned and to consider his options. He could continue investigating on his own, trying to piece together the connection between Rebecca and Princess Catherine. He could attempt to contact Daniel Morrison and ask about his sister. Or he could try to reach out directly to Princess Catherine herself, though he had no idea how one went about contacting European royalty. Each option felt overwhelming and potentially dangerous to the life he had built with Sarah and their children. If his suspicions were correct, and if Princess Catherine really was his daughter, then reaching out to her would inevitably lead to questions about why he had never known about her existence. It would mean confronting the possibility that Rebecca had kept their child a secret from him for reasons he couldn't understand. When Marcus arrived home that evening, his family was gathered around the kitchen table working on homework and discussing their weekend plans. Emma looked up from her history project and smiled at her father. "Dad, I've been working more on our family tree. Did you ever find out anything about great-grandpa's military service? Mrs. Johnson says there are websites where you can look up old records." The irony of his daughter's request was not lost on Marcus. While she was trying to trace their known family history back generations, he was grappling with the possibility that their family tree included branches they had never imagined. He managed to give Emma some vague encouragement about her project, while his mind continued to race with thoughts of Princess Catherine and the choices he faced. That night, after Sarah and the children had gone to bed, Marcus sat in his home office with the papers he had printed at the library spread out across his desk. In the quiet darkness, surrounded by the familiar sounds of his house settling around him, he studied the photographs of Princess Catherine and tried to see traces of himself in her features. The resemblance that had struck him initially seemed even more pronounced now that he was looking for it specifically. Marcus found himself imagining what it would be like to meet her. Would she be curious about him, or would she want nothing to do with the American mechanic who might be her biological father? Did she even know that she was adopted, or had the Fairchild family raised her believing that she was truly one of their bloodline? How would it affect her life and her position in the royal family if the truth about her parentage became public? These questions led to even more troubling thoughts about his own family. How would Emma and Jake react to learning that they had an older half-sister who was European royalty? How would Sarah handle the revelation that Marcus had had a relationship before they met that had resulted in a child he had never known about? The potential consequences seemed to spiral outward in every direction, threatening to destroy the peaceful life they had built together. As the weekend passed, Marcus found it increasingly difficult to maintain his normal routine. During Sunday dinner with Sarah's parents, he found himself staring off into space while his father-in-law told stories about his latest fishing trip. At church, He couldn't concentrate on the sermon and instead found himself praying for guidance about what he should do with the information he had discovered. Monday morning brought the decision that Marcus had been avoiding. Sitting in his office before the garage opened, he picked up his phone and dialed the number for Daniel Morrison's financial advisory office in Denver. His hands shook as he waited for someone to answer, and he nearly hung up twice before a receptionist's cheerful voice came on the line. "Morrison Financial Services, how may I help you?" Marcus cleared his throat and tried to sound casual. "Hello, I'm trying to reach Daniel Morrison. This is Marcus Thompson, and I was his roommate in college. I was hoping to reconnect with him." There was a brief pause before the receptionist responded. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Morrison is with a client right now. May I take a message and have him return your call?" Marcus hesitated, realizing he hadn't prepared for this moment. "Yes, please tell him that Marcus Thompson called. He can reach me at—" Marcus gave his phone number and asked that Daniel call him back when convenient. After hanging up, he sat in his office chair feeling as though he had just taken a step off a cliff. The call came back 3 hours later, just as Marcus was finishing up an oil change on a customer's SUV. His phone rang with a Colorado area code, and Marcus's heart began to pound as he answered. "Marcus Thompson, holy cow, I can't believe it. This is Danny Morrison. How the heck are you, man?" Daniel's voice was warm and enthusiastic, immediately bringing back memories of their college friendship. Marcus found himself smiling despite his nervousness as they exchanged basic information about their lives since graduation. Daniel had gotten married, divorced, and married again. He had 2 children and had built a successful business helping people plan for retirement. After several minutes of catching up, Marcus took a deep breath and steered the conversation toward the real reason for his call. "Danny, I hope this doesn't sound too strange, but I've been thinking a lot lately about that spring when your sister Rebecca stayed with us. I was wondering if you might know how to get in touch with her." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Daniel finally spoke, his voice had lost much of its earlier enthusiasm. "Rebecca? Wow, that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Can I ask why you're looking for her?" Marcus had prepared for this question, but he still struggled with how much to reveal. "It's complicated, but I think there might be something important I need to discuss with her. Something from that time when she stayed with us." Another pause, longer this time. When Daniel spoke again, his voice was careful and measured. "Marcus, I don't know how to tell you this, but Rebecca died about 18 years ago. She was in a car accident in California. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you." The news hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had been prepared for the possibility that tracking down Rebecca might be difficult, but he had never considered that she might be dead. If Rebecca was indeed Princess Catherine's mother, then his daughter had lost her biological mother when she was only 6 years old. The tragedy of this realization was overwhelming. "I'm so sorry for your loss," Marcus managed to say. "I had no idea we're there. Did she have any children?" Daniel's response was immediate and firm. "No, Rebecca never had any children. She was very clear about that. Why do you ask?" Marcus felt the world spinning around him as he tried to process this information. If Daniel was telling the truth, and if Rebecca had never had children, then his theory about Princess Catherine's parentage was completely wrong. But the DNA test results had been so definitive, and the resemblance between them seemed so clear. How could he reconcile these contradictory pieces of information? "Marcus, are you still there?" Daniel's voice sounded concerned. "Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry, this is just a lot to take in. I guess I was mistaken about something." Marcus tried to keep his voice steady while his mind raced with new questions and possibilities. They talked for a few more minutes, with Daniel sharing some memories of his sister and expressing curiosity about why Marcus had been trying to find her after so many years. Marcus managed to deflect his questions without revealing the real reason for his call, but he could tell that Daniel remained puzzled by the conversation. After hanging up, Marcus sat in his office feeling more confused than ever. If Rebecca wasn't Princess Catherine's mother, then who was? And how could the DNA test show such a strong paternal match if he had never had any other relationships that could have resulted in a child? The mystery had deepened rather than being resolved, leaving Marcus with even more questions than when he had started his investigation. As he struggled to make sense of these new developments, Marcus realized that he was going to need help. The amateur investigation he had been conducting was clearly insufficient for unraveling such a complex puzzle. If he truly wanted to understand his connection to Princess Catherine, he was going to need professional assistance from someone who specialized in genealogical research and international family mysteries. The decision to seek help felt like another major step toward a truth that might change everything about his life. As Marcus prepared to close the garage for the day, he knew that tomorrow would bring new choices and new challenges in his quest to understand the shocking revelation that had turned his world upside down. Marcus spent the next 2 days researching genealogical investigators and family tracing services online. The options ranged from amateur enthusiasts who charged modest fees to help people build family trees, to professional investigators who specialized in complex international cases involving adoption, inheritance disputes, and royal lineages. The costs varied dramatically, with some services charging thousands of dollars for comprehensive investigations. After reading dozens of reviews and comparing credentials, Marcus settled on contacting Helena Blackwood, a genealogical investigator based in Boston who specialized in transatlantic family mysteries. Her website featured testimonials from clients who had used her services to solve decades-old adoption cases and trace family connections across multiple countries. Her fees were substantial, but her success rate was impressive, and she offered an initial consultation at a reduced rate. Calling Helena's office required Marcus to take another step deeper into his secret investigation. He scheduled the call for during his lunch break on Wednesday, when he could speak privately from his truck parked behind the garage. When Helena's calm, professional voice came on the line, Marcus found himself feeling both relieved and terrified to finally be sharing his story with someone who might be able to help. Helena listened without interruption as Marcus explained about the DNA test results, his research into Princess Catherine's background, and his unsuccessful attempt to trace the connection through his college roommate's sister. She asked careful questions about dates, locations, and the specific details of the Ancestry test results. Her approach was methodical and reassuring, treating his unusual situation as just another complex puzzle to be solved. "Mr. Thompson, cases like yours are more common than you might think," Helena said, after Marcus had finished explaining his situation. "DNA testing has revealed many unexpected family connections, including several that have involved people connected to European nobility. The key is to approach this systematically and verify every piece of information before drawing conclusions." Helena explained that her investigation would involve several phases. First, she would work with the Ancestry testing company to confirm the accuracy of the DNA results and understand exactly what type of genetic relationship the test had identified. Then, she would conduct a comprehensive search of international adoption records, immigration documents, and birth records to trace Princess Catherine's path from America to the Fairchild family in England. "I should warn you," Helena continued, "that investigations involving royal families often uncover information that has been deliberately concealed for privacy or security reasons. If Princess Catherine's placement with the Fairchild family was arranged through unofficial channels, there may be people who have gone to considerable lengths to keep her origins secret. Are you prepared for the possibility that pursuing this truth might have consequences you haven't anticipated?" Marcus had been asking himself the same question for days. Every step he took toward uncovering the truth felt like he was walking further away from the simple, peaceful life he had built with Sarah and their children. But the possibility that he had a daughter he had never known about was too important to ignore, regardless of the potential complications. "I need to know the truth," Marcus told Helena. "If Princess Catherine really is my daughter, then I've missed 24 years of her life. I can't just pretend this never happened." Helena agreed to take on his case and outlined a timeline for her investigation. She estimated that the initial phase of verifying the DNA results and tracing Princess Catherine's early life would take approximately 2 weeks. If that research confirmed the potential family connection, they would move to a second phase involving more detailed international searches and possibly attempting to contact representatives of the Fairchild family. The cost for the complete investigation would be significant, requiring Marcus to dip into the savings account he and Sarah had been building for their children's college education. Spending their family's money on what might turn out to be a wild goose chase felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for, but Marcus couldn't see any alternative. He authorized Helena to begin her work and arranged to send her copies of all the research he had already completed. Over the following days, Marcus struggled to maintain his normal routine while waiting for Helena's initial findings. Sarah commented several times on his distracted behavior, and even his children began to notice that their father seemed preoccupied and distant. Emma asked him directly if everything was okay at work, and Marcus found himself reassuring her with increasing difficulty. The first breakthrough came exactly 1 week after Helena began her investigation. She called Marcus during his lunch break with news that both confirmed his hopes and complicated his situation even further. "I verified your DNA results with the testing company," Helena reported. "The genetic match with Princess Catherine is indeed indicating a parent-child relationship with 99.7% certainty. However, I've also discovered something unexpected. When I cross-referenced your genetic profile with additional databases, I found another close match that wasn't included in your original Ancestry report." Helena explained that Marcus's DNA also showed a strong familial connection to someone listed as David Thompson in a separate genetic genealogy database. According to the genetic markers, David Thompson appeared to be Marcus's identical twin brother. "That's impossible," Marcus said immediately. "I don't have a twin brother, I don't have any siblings at all. My parents never mentioned anything about another child." "I understand this is shocking," Helena replied, "but identical twins share nearly 100% of their DNA, which means that either you have a twin brother you've never known about, or David Thompson is actually you, listed in the database under a different identity. I'm going to need to investigate both possibilities." The revelation about a potential twin brother hit Marcus like a second earthquake. If Helena was right, it meant that his parents had kept even more secrets from him than he had ever imagined. It also raised the possibility that his connection to Princess Catherine might not be direct, but might instead be through this mysterious twin brother. Helena's investigation into David Thompson revealed that he was listed as deceased, having died in a car accident in 1999 when he would have been 20 years old. The records showed that he had been living in California at the time of his death, and that he had been working as a translator for an international humanitarian organization that helped place children in protective situations. "This is starting to make sense," Helena told Marcus during their follow-up conversation. "If David Thompson was your identical twin, and if he was working with an organization that specialized in child placement, he could very well be Princess Catherine's biological father. The DNA test wouldn't be able to distinguish between you and an identical twin." The possibility that Princess Catherine was his niece rather than his daughter was both a relief and a disappointment to Marcus. It would explain the genetic connection without requiring him to account for a relationship he couldn't remember having. But it also meant that his daughter, if she truly was his daughter, was now deceased, and that Marcus would never have the opportunity to know the brother he had apparently been separated from at birth. Helena continued her investigation into David Thompson's background and his potential connection to Princess Catherine. What she discovered painted a picture of a young man who had dedicated his life to helping children escape dangerous situations. David had worked for an organization called International Children's Sanctuary, which operated in various countries around the world to identify children at risk and place them with safe families. The records Helena obtained showed that David Thompson had been involved in a case in early 2002 that resulted in the emergency placement of a young child with a British family. The child's identity was protected by confidentiality agreements, but the timing and circumstances matched perfectly with what Marcus had learned about Princess Catherine's arrival at the Fairchild estate. "It appears that your brother was instrumental in saving Princess Catherine from some kind of dangerous situation and arranging for her placement with the Fairchild family," Helena explained. "The exact nature of the danger isn't clear from the records, but it was serious enough to require immediate relocation and the creation of a completely new identity for the child." As Helena shared these findings, Marcus found himself grappling with a completely different emotional landscape. Instead of having discovered a daughter he had never known about, he had learned about a brother whose existence had been hidden from him and who had died young while doing heroic work. Princess Catherine wasn't his daughter, but she was his niece, connected to him through a family member he had never had the chance to meet. The revelation about David also raised troubling questions about Marcus's own past. If he had an identical twin who had been separated from him at birth, what did that say about his parents and the stories they had told him about his early life? Why had they never mentioned David, and how had they managed to keep such a significant secret for so many years? Helena's investigation into Marcus's own origins began to uncover disturbing evidence that his entire understanding of his early life had been built on lies and omissions. Birth records showed that Marcus and David had indeed been born as twins, but they had been separated when they were only 6 months old. The official records suggested that the separation had been voluntary, arranged by parents who felt unable to care for both children. But there were inconsistencies in the paperwork that suggested a more complex situation. "I'm finding evidence that your parents may not have been your biological parents at all," Helena told Marcus during what had become their weekly phone calls. "The adoption records I've uncovered suggest that both you and David were placed with different families when you were infants, and that your adoptive parents were told never to reveal the truth about your origins." This news was almost too much for Marcus to process. In the span of a few weeks, he had gone from believing he was the father of a European princess to learning that he had a twin brother he had never known about, and now to discovering that the people he had thought were his parents had actually adopted him under mysterious circumstances. The deeper Helena dug into the adoption records, the more complex the story became. Both Marcus and David appeared to have been born to parents who were involved in some kind of international intelligence work. The records were heavily redacted, but there were references to national security considerations and witness protection protocols that suggested their birth parents had been in serious danger. "It looks like you and your brother were separated and placed in protective custody when you were Bobbies," Helena explained. "Your adoptive parents were probably told just enough to care for you safely, but they were instructed to keep your true origins secret to protect everyone involved." Marcus found himself thinking about his adoptive parents with new eyes. He remembered his father as a quiet, hardworking man who had never talked much about his past. His mother had been loving, but often seemed nervous, particularly when strangers came to the door or when Marcus asked too many questions about their family history. Now their behavior made sense in a completely different context. The investigation also revealed that David had spent his adult life trying to learn more about their origins and their separation. Helena found evidence that he had been in contact with their biological parents shortly before his death, and that he had been working to reunite families that had been separated for security reasons. "Your brother appears to have dedicated his life to helping other children in situations similar to your own," Helena told Marcus. "His work with International Children's Sanctuary was directly related to his own experience of being separated from his family for protection. Princess Catherine's case was probably very personal to him." As Helena's investigation neared completion, she presented Marcus with a choice that would determine the next phase of his journey. She had gathered enough evidence to be confident about the family connections she had uncovered, and she had identified several people who could provide more information about Marcus's origins and his brother's work. But pursuing that information would require Marcus to contact people who had spent decades keeping these secrets, and it might expose Princess Catherine's true background to people who had worked hard to protect her privacy. "You could stop here," Helena told him. "You know the truth about your connection to Princess Catherine, and you understand why your brother's death was so significant. That might be enough to give you the closure you're looking for. Or you could choose to go deeper, knowing that every additional revelation is going to complicate your life in ways you can't predict." Marcus sat in his truck behind the garage, listening to Helena outline his options while watching the familiar rhythm of his small town continuing around him. People were walking their dogs, children were playing in a nearby park, and life was proceeding exactly as it had before he had learned about DNA tests and royal families and secret adoptions. He could choose to return to that simple existence, armed with the knowledge that he had a niece who was living safely and successfully with a family that loved her. But Marcus also knew that learning the truth about his origins might help him understand other aspects of his life that had never made complete sense. There had always been gaps in his family's stories, moments when his parents had seemed to be hiding something important, and traits in his own personality that had seemed to come from nowhere. "I want to know everything," Marcus told Helena. "Whatever the consequences, I need to understand where I came from and what happened to my brother. And if there's a way to let Princess Catherine know about her connection to us, I think she deserves that opportunity as well." Helena cautioned him once more about the potential ramifications of his decision, but she agreed to move forward with the next phase of the investigation. This would involve contacting representatives of International Children's Sanctuary, attempting to reach surviving members of Marcus's biological family, and potentially reaching out to the Fairchild family to inquire about Princess Catherine's interest in learning more about her American relatives. As Marcus prepared to hang up the phone and return to his afternoon work at the garage, Helena made one final observation that stayed with him for the rest of the day. "Mr. Thompson, in my 20 years of doing this kind of work, I've learned that families are much more complicated than most people realize. Biology is just one factor in the relationships that shape us. Your brother may have been Princess Catherine's biological father, but you're the one who's alive to potentially be part of her life now. That's not an accident or a coincidence. Sometimes the family we end up with is exactly the family we're meant to have." That evening, as Marcus sat at the dinner table with Sarah, Emma, and Jake, he found himself looking at them with profound gratitude. Whatever complicated truths he was about to uncover about his origins and his extended family, these three people would always be his real family. They were the ones who had shared his daily life, supported his dreams, and created the home that had given him the foundation to handle whatever revelations lay ahead. But he also knew that his family was about to grow in ways he couldn't have imagined. Somewhere in England, Princess Catherine was living her life without knowing that she had an uncle in Ohio who was just beginning to understand his connection to her extraordinary story. Whether she would want to acknowledge that connection remained to be seen, but Marcus was finally ready to find out. Helena's next phase of investigation moved quickly once she began contacting the right people. Within 3 days of Marcus giving her permission to pursue deeper answers, she had connected with Margaret Sinclair, a former director of International Children's Sanctuary who had worked closely with David Thompson in the years before his death. Margaret, now retired and living in Vermont, agreed to meet with Helena in person to discuss David's work and the circumstances surrounding Princess Catherine's placement with the Fairchild family. While Helena traveled to Vermont for this crucial interview, Marcus found himself in the increasingly difficult position of maintaining his normal life, while his entire understanding of his family was being rebuilt from the ground up. The weight of the secrets he was carrying began to affect every aspect of his daily routine. He made careless mistakes at work, forgot important appointments, and struggled to engage in conversations with his family about everyday topics that suddenly seemed trivial in comparison to the earth-shaking revelations he was processing. Sarah's concern deepened into genuine worry when Marcus failed to remember their wedding anniversary, something that had never happened in their 15 years of marriage. She approached him that evening as he sat in his workshop behind their house, ostensibly organizing tools, but actually staring blankly at the wall while his mind raced with thoughts of twin brothers and international conspiracies. "Marcus, we need to talk," Sarah said, settling herself on the workshop stool across from his workbench. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this has gone far beyond just being tired or stressed about work. You're somewhere else completely, and I'm starting to get scared that something serious is wrong." Marcus looked at his wife, seeing the genuine fear and confusion in her eyes, and realized that his attempt to protect her from his shocking discoveries was actually causing her more anxiety than the truth probably would. In that moment, sitting in the workshop where he had always found peace and clarity, Marcus made the decision to tell Sarah everything. "You're right," he said, setting down the wrench he had been holding without purpose. "Something is wrong, or at least something has happened that I don't know how to handle. I've been trying to figure it out on my own, but I think I need your help." Over the next hour, Marcus told Sarah about the Ancestry test results, his research into Princess Catherine, his discovery of a twin brother he had never known existed, and the ongoing investigation that was revealing layer after layer of hidden family history. Sarah listened without interruption, her expression moving from confusion to amazement to concern as Marcus shared each new piece of information. When he finished explaining everything he had learned, Sarah was quiet for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what her husband had just revealed. Finally, she reached across the workbench and took his hands in hers. "Why didn't you tell me about this from the beginning?" she asked, her voice gentle but hurt. "Did you think I wouldn't want to help you figure this out? Did you think I would be angry about you having a connection to some woman from college?" Marcus felt a wave of shame as he realized how his secretiveness had affected Sarah. "I was scared," he admitted. "I was scared that learning I might have had a child with someone else would hurt you, even though it happened before we met. I was scared that all these family secrets would somehow change how you see me, and I was scared that pursuing this truth might somehow damage our family." Sarah squeezed his hands and looked directly into his eyes. "Marcus Thompson, you are the same man you were before you took that DNA test. Learning that you have more family than you knew about doesn't change who you are or how much I love you. And if you really do have a niece who's a princess in England, then Emma and Jake have a cousin they might want to know about someday." The relief Marcus felt at finally sharing his burden with Sarah was enormous. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe deeply and think clearly about his situation. Sarah's practical approach to the revelations helped him see them in a new light. Rather than being threats to their family stability, these discoveries could potentially enrich their lives and give their children a broader understanding of their heritage. That night, Marcus and Sarah stayed up late discussing the implications of Helena's investigation and what they wanted to do with whatever additional information she uncovered. Sarah was particularly interested in the possibility that Marcus's birth parents might still be alive and potentially reachable through Helena's contacts. She also raised practical questions about how they would handle telling Emma and Jake about their newly discovered family history. "The kids are going to be fascinated by this," Sarah said as they finally prepared for bed. "Emma's been working on that family tree project for weeks, and here it turns out that our family is connected to European royalty. She's going to think it's like something out of a fairy tale." Marcus smiled for the first time in days, imagining his daughter's reaction to learning that her ancestry research had led to the discovery of a princess cousin. "What do you think we should tell them, and when?" "I think we should wait until Helena finishes her investigation," Sarah replied thoughtfully. "That way we'll have the complete story to share with them, rather than confusing them with partial information that might change. But once we know everything, I think we should be completely honest with them. They're old enough to understand complicated family situations, and they deserve to know the truth about their heritage." The next morning brought a call from Helena with significant updates from her meeting with Margaret Sinclair. The former director of International Children's Sanctuary had been surprisingly forthcoming about David Thompson's work and the specific case that had led to Princess Catherine's placement with the Fairchild family. "Your brother was one of our most dedicated field agents," Helena reported, sharing Margaret's words. "He was particularly effective in cases involving children whose parents were in witness protection or who were otherwise in danger due to their family's activities. He seemed to have a personal understanding of what those children were going through." According to Margaret, David had been working on a case involving a family that had been providing information to international law enforcement about human trafficking operations. The family had been discovered by the criminals they were helping to investigate, and both parents had been killed in what was made to look like a random car accident. Their 3-year-old daughter had survived the attack, but was clearly in immediate danger from the same people who had murdered her parents. David arranged for the little girl to be brought to England within 48 hours of her parents' death, Helena continued. He had developed a relationship with Lord William Fairchild through previous cases, and the Fairchild family had proven themselves to be exceptional at providing secure homes for children who needed to disappear completely from their previous lives. The operation had been successful, with Princess Catherine being given a completely new identity and integrated into the Fairchild family as though she had always been part of their noble lineage. The fabricated story about her being adopted into the family through special decree had provided cover for her true origins while allowing her to grow up safely and with all the privileges of her adopted status. Margaret told me that David was proud of this particular case because he felt he had saved the little girl from a life of either hiding or potentially being targeted by her parents' killers, Helena reported. But she also said that he was struggling with his own family questions around that time, and that he had begun investigating his own origins. This was where the story took an even more surprising turn. Margaret revealed that David had discovered the truth about his adoption and separation from his twin brother shortly before his death. He had learned that their birth parents were still alive and living under assumed identities in Canada, where they had been relocated after providing crucial testimony in an international organized crime case. "Your brother was planning to reunite with your biological parents and to try to find you when he was killed," Helena told Marcus. According to Margaret, his death wasn't an accident. He was being followed by people connected to one of his previous cases, and they caused the car crash that took his life. The revelation that David had been murdered rather than dying in a random accident added a dark element to the story that Marcus hadn't been prepared for. It also raised questions about whether pursuing contact with his birth parents or with Princess Catherine might put any of them in danger from the same people who had killed his brother. Helena had anticipated this concern and had already begun investigating whether the threats that had led to David's death were still active. "Margaret put me in touch with some people who are still involved in international law enforcement," she explained. "According to them, most of the criminal organization that was targeting families like yours was dismantled in the early 2000s. The people directly responsible for your brother's death are either dead or in prison." However, Helena cautioned that reaching out to Marcus's birth parents would still require careful consideration and professional assistance. "They've been living under assumed identities for over 25 years, she explained. "Contact with them would need to be arranged through the proper channels to ensure everyone's safety." As for Princess Catherine, Helena had learned that the Fairchild family had always been open with her about her adoption, though they had never revealed the specific details about her birth parents or the circumstances that had led to her placement with them. She knew that her parents had died when she was young and that she had been brought to England for her protection, but she had never known about her connection to David Thompson or the existence of her American uncle. "Margaret believes that Princess Catherine would be very interested in learning more about her American family," Helena told Marcus. "She's apparently expressed curiosity about her origins over the years, and she's involved in charitable work that's very similar to what your brother was doing. It's as though she's unconsciously continuing his mission of helping vulnerable children." Helena had also learned that Lord William Fairchild was remarkably progressive in his approach to family connections. Unlike some royal families that guarded their privacy jealously, he had always encouraged the young people he had adopted to explore their heritage and maintain connections with their birth families when it was safe to do so. "If you decide you want to reach out to Princess Catherine, Lord Fairchild would probably be supportive," Helena explained. "But the approach would need to be handled diplomatically, probably through formal channels rather than just showing up at their estate or sending an email." After discussing all of these developments with Sarah, Marcus realized that he was facing several major decisions simultaneously. He could pursue contact with his biological parents in Canada, which might help him understand more about his family's history, but would also require him to confront the dangers that had shaped his entire life. He could attempt to reach out to Princess Catherine and the Fairchild family, which might lead to a wonderful relationship with his niece, but could also create complications for her position in British society. Or he could simply be satisfied with the knowledge he had gained and return to his quiet life in Ohio, leaving the past buried. "I think we should take this one step at a time," Sarah suggested during one of their late-night conversations about the situation. "Maybe we should start by trying to contact your birth parents. If that goes well, and if they think it's safe, then we could consider reaching out to Princess Catherine. But I think you need to understand your own story completely before you try to become part of hers." Marcus agreed with Sarah's reasoning, and he asked Helena to begin the process of arranging contact with his biological parents through the appropriate law enforcement channels. This would involve working with Canadian authorities and international witness protection programs to ensure that any contact was handled safely and didn't compromise the security that had kept his birth parents alive for 25 years. While Helena worked on arranging this contact, Marcus and Sarah decided it was time to tell their children about the family discoveries they had made. They chose a quiet Sunday afternoon when both Emma and Jake were home and relaxed, and they gathered in the living room for what they described as an important family discussion. "Remember that ancestry test we took a few months ago?" Marcus began, looking at his children's curious faces. "Well, the results revealed some information about our family that we didn't expect, and we wanted to share it with you." Emma immediately perked up with interest. "Did you find something for my family tree project?" "We found much more than that," Sarah said with a smile. "It turns out that your dad has family he never knew about, including a niece who lives in England." Over the next hour, Marcus and Sarah shared an age-appropriate version of the story with their children, focusing on the positive aspects of discovering new family members while being honest about the complexity of the situation. They explained about David, the twin uncle they had never known, and about Princess Catherine, the cousin who had grown up in a very different world. Emma's reaction was everything Sarah had predicted. She was absolutely fascinated by the idea that they were connected to royalty, and she immediately began asking questions about what Princess Catherine looked like, what her life was like, and whether they would ever get to meet her. Jake, being younger and more practical, was primarily interested in whether being related to a princess meant they were rich now. "It doesn't change our lives here at all," Marcus explained to his son. "We're still the same family we've always been. We just know more now about where we came from and who else is part of our larger family." Both children adapted to the news with the resilience that Marcus had hoped for. Emma immediately wanted to revise her family tree project to include their newly discovered relatives, and Jake began telling his friends at school that he was related to a princess, though he couldn't provide many details since the story was still unfolding. 3 weeks after the children learned about their extended family, Helena called with the news that Marcus had been both hoping for and dreading. She had successfully arranged contact with his biological parents through Canadian authorities, and they were eager to speak with him. They had been living under the names Robert and Catherine Morrison in a small town outside Toronto, and they had never stopped hoping that someday they would be able to reconnect with the sons they had been forced to give up. "They want to meet you," Helena told Marcus. "They're willing to come to the United States, or you could go to Canada. They're also prepared to explain everything that happened and why the separation was necessary. According to the authorities I've been working with, it's completely safe for you to have this contact now." The prospect of meeting his birth parents filled Marcus with a mixture of excitement and terror. These were the people who had given him life, but had been absent from every important moment of his childhood and adulthood. They were strangers who were also his closest genetic relatives, and they possessed the answers to questions he had been carrying his entire life without even knowing he should ask them. After discussing it with Sarah, Marcus decided that he wanted to meet his birth parents in person, and he arranged to travel to Toronto the following weekend. Sarah would accompany him, and they would leave the children with Sarah's parents while they navigated this emotionally complex reunion. As Marcus prepared for this trip, he reflected on how dramatically his life had changed since the day Emma had convinced him to take that Ancestry test. In just a few months, he had gone from being a small-town mechanic with a simple family history to being part of a complex international story involving witness protection, royal adoptions, and family secrets that stretched across decades. The truth he was about to uncover would finally explain the mysteries that had shaped his entire existence. And after that, he would have to decide whether he was ready to take the next step of reaching out to Princess Catherine and potentially becoming part of her life as well. For the first time since this journey began, Marcus felt ready for whatever answers awaited him. The flight to Toronto felt surreal to Marcus as he watched the landscape change beneath him. He had never traveled outside the United States, and the idea that he was flying to meet parents he had never known existed still seemed like something that was happening to someone else. Sarah sat beside him, holding his hand and offering quiet reassurance as they approached what would undoubtedly be one of the most emotionally intense experiences of his life. Helena had arranged for them to meet at a hotel conference room in downtown Toronto, with Canadian authorities discreetly present to ensure everyone's safety and to facilitate the reunion after 25 years of separation. As Marcus and Sarah waited in the hotel lobby, Marcus found himself studying every middle-aged couple that walked by, wondering if he would recognize his birth parents or if they would recognize him. When Robert and Catherine Morrison entered the lobby, there was no question about their identity. Marcus saw his own eyes looking back at him from Robert's face, and Catherine's smile was identical to the one he saw in the mirror every morning. They were older than he had expected, probably in their early 60s, but they moved with a vitality and alertness that suggested lives spent constantly looking over their shoulders. The moment Marcus stood up from the lobby chairs, Catherine began to cry. She covered her mouth with her hands as though she couldn't believe what she was seeing, and Robert put his arm around her while his own eyes filled with tears. For several minutes, the four of them stood in the hotel lobby just looking at each other, trying to bridge 25 years of separation with their eyes. "Marcus," Catherine finally whispered, reaching out to touch his face as though confirming he was real. "You look exactly like your father did when he was your age, and you look like David too. Oh, my sweet boy, we never stopped thinking about you." The formal conference room that Helena had reserved felt too sterile for such an intimate reunion, so they moved instead to a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant where they could talk privately while sharing a meal. For the first hour, conversation was halting and emotional as they all struggled to know where to begin with so much lost time to account for. Robert and Catherine explained that they had originally been Michael and Elizabeth Henderson, living in Chicago where Robert worked as an investigative journalist specializing in organized crime. In the late 1990s, Robert had uncovered evidence of a human trafficking network that included several high-ranking officials in both American and international law enforcement. When he tried to publish his findings, his family became immediate targets for elimination. "The night you boys were born was the happiest night of our lives," Catherine told Marcus, her voice still trembling with emotion. "But it was also the beginning of the most terrifying period we had ever experienced. Within a week of bringing you home from the hospital, we realized we were being followed. Someone had broken into Robert's office, and we started receiving threatening phone calls." The decision to enter witness protection had been agonizing for the young parents. They had been told that the safest option for their infant sons would be to place them with carefully selected families, while Robert and Catherine testified against the criminal organization. The separation was supposed to be temporary, lasting only until the trials were completed and the immediate threats were eliminated. "We thought we would get you back within a year," Robert explained, his voice heavy with regret. "The prosecutors told us that once the key figures were convicted, the organization would be dismantled and we could reunite our family. But every time we thought it was safe, new threats would emerge or new evidence would surface that required additional testimony." Marcus learned that his birth parents had spent the first 5 years after the separation living in a series of safe houses across the Midwest, providing ongoing cooperation to law enforcement while desperately trying to maintain some contact with their sons. They had received regular updates about Marcus and David from social workers, including photographs and school reports, but direct contact had been deemed too dangerous. "We have boxes of pictures and letters we wrote to you but could never send," Catherine told Marcus. "Every Christmas and every birthday, we wrote you letters telling you how much we loved you and how sorry we were that we couldn't be with you. We saved every drawing you made in preschool and every report card from elementary school." The revelation that his birth parents had been following his life from a distance was both comforting and heartbreaking to Marcus. It meant that his childhood achievements and milestones had mattered to someone besides his adoptive parents, but it also highlighted how much they had all lost during the years of enforced separation. As the afternoon progressed, Robert and Catherine shared what they knew about David's adult life and his decision to work with International Children's Sanctuary. They had been secretly proud of their son's choice to help other children in situations similar to their own, but they had also been terrified that his work would put him in danger from the same types of criminals who had originally threatened their family. "David contacted us about 6 months before he died," Robert revealed. "He had figured out who we really were and where we were living. We met him secretly twice, and we were planning a way to safely reunite him with you when he was killed." The confirmation that David's death had been murder rather than an accident was devastating for Marcus to hear, but it also helped him understand the heroic nature of his brother's work and the risks he had been willing to take to help vulnerable children. Learning about David's courage and dedication helped Marcus feel proud of the brother he had never gotten to know. Catherine shared something that brought Marcus to tears once again. "David told us about Princess Catherine and how proud he was of the life she was building with the Fairchild family. He said that placing her safely had been the most important thing he had ever done, and that he hoped someday she would understand how much her parents had loved her." As the day wore on, Marcus found himself grieving not only for the brother he had lost, but for the childhood he had never experienced with his birth parents and the family relationships that had been stolen by circumstances beyond anyone's control. But he also felt a profound sense of completion as the mysteries that had always haunted him finally made sense. Robert and Catherine were eager to learn about Marcus's life with his adoptive parents, his marriage to Sarah, and their grandchildren Emma and Jake. They were amazed by the photographs Marcus showed them and fascinated by the stories he shared about his career as a mechanic and his family's life in Ohio. "Your adoptive parents did a wonderful job raising you," Catherine told Marcus. "You turned out to be exactly the kind of man we hoped you would become. We can never repay them for giving you the love and stability we couldn't provide." The conversation eventually turned to Princess Catherine and the possibility of Marcus reaching out to establish a relationship with his niece. Robert and Catherine were enthusiastic about this prospect, seeing it as a way to honor David's memory and continue the family connections that had been interrupted by tragedy. "She deserves to know about her American family," Robert said firmly. And she deserves to understand the sacrifice her parents made and the heroism of your brother in saving her life. If she's anything like David described, she'll want to know the truth about where she came from. Helena, who had been coordinating the reunion logistics, joined them for dinner and provided an update on the arrangements she had been making for potential contact with the Fairchild family. Through her connections with international law enforcement and child protection services, she had been able to reach out to Lord William Fairchild's staff and explain the nature of Marcus's family connection to Princess Catherine. Lord Fairchild is very interested in facilitating contact between Princess Catherine and her American family, Helena reported. He's always encouraged her to explore her heritage, and he believes this connection will be meaningful for her. He suggested that the initial contact be handled through formal correspondence, followed by a potential meeting if both parties are interested. The prospect of writing to Princess Catherine felt both exciting and terrifying to Marcus. What could he possibly say to introduce himself to a niece he had never known existed? How could he explain the complex family history that had led to their separation without overwhelming her with information about murder, witness protection, and international criminal conspiracies? Catherine offered to help Marcus craft his first letter to Princess Catherine. "You should tell her about David first," she suggested. "She should know what kind of man her father was and how much he loved her. Then you can introduce yourself and explain how we're all connected. The details about why she was separated from us can come later, after she's had time to process the basic information." Over the following months, Marcus and Princess Catherine began a correspondence that gradually evolved from formal introductions to genuine family connection. Her first response to Marcus's letter was cautious, but curious, expressing amazement at learning about her American relatives and asking thoughtful questions about David's work and his personality. As their correspondence continued, Marcus learned that Princess Catherine had indeed inherited David's passion for helping vulnerable children. She was involved in several international charities focused on child welfare, and she had been considering starting a foundation to support children who had been displaced by violence or family trauma. Learning about her father's work with International Children's Sanctuary inspired her to move forward with these plans. Princess Catherine also expressed interest in meeting Marcus and his family in person, though the logistics of such a meeting required careful planning due to her royal status and security requirements. Lord Fairchild eventually suggested that the meeting take place at the Fairchild estate in England, where privacy and security could be maintained while allowing for an extended visit. The trip to England 6 months later felt like the culmination of Marcus's extraordinary journey of family discovery. Sarah, Emma, and Jake accompanied him to meet their royal relative, and Emma could barely contain her excitement at the prospect of visiting an actual castle and meeting an actual princess. When they arrived at the Fairchild estate, Marcus was struck by the grandeur of the setting, but also by the warmth of the welcome they received. Lord William Fairchild was a gracious host who immediately made them feel comfortable despite the obvious differences in their social backgrounds. Princess Catherine herself was exactly what Marcus had hoped she would be: intelligent, compassionate, and genuinely interested in learning about her American family. The resemblance between Princess Catherine and David was evident in the photographs she showed them from her childhood, but Marcus also recognized traits that connected her to their shared family heritage. She had his same stubborn determination and Robert's analytical mind. She had Catherine's gentle compassion and the same deep sense of justice that had motivated David's work with vulnerable children. During their week-long visit, Marcus had the opportunity to share stories about David's childhood that Princess Catherine had never heard, based on information from their birth parents and his own research into his brother's life. In return, she shared memories of growing up with the Fairchild family and her gradual understanding of her unique position as an adopted member of the royal household. "I always knew I was different from other members of royal families," Princess Catherine told Marcus during one of their long conversations. "I felt a connection to children who were displaced or in danger, but I never understood why until I learned about my father's work. Now it makes perfect sense." Emma and Jake were fascinated by their cousin and by the castle environment, but they also quickly adapted to treating Princess Catherine as simply another family member rather than as a celebrity. This natural acceptance seemed to delight Princess Catherine, who had rarely experienced such uncomplicated family relationships. On their last night at the estate, Lord Fairchild hosted a formal dinner to celebrate the reunion of Princess Catherine with her American family. During his toast, he spoke about the importance of family connections that transcend geographical and social boundaries. Family is not just about genetics or legal relationships, Lord Fairchild said, raising his glass to Marcus and his family. Family is about the people who choose to love and support each other through life's challenges. Tonight we celebrate not just the discovery of biological connections, but the creation of new family bonds that will enrich all of our lives. As Marcus prepared to return to Ohio, he reflected on how much his understanding of family had expanded since that day when Emma had convinced him to take a DNA test. He had started with a simple nuclear family and had discovered connections that stretched across oceans and included parents he had never known.